You're listening to Innovating Tomorrow's Medicine with Dr. Jeff Trickett.
In this episode, I'm speaking with James Mackay, 40 years in executive management and drug development. 30-year career at AstraZeneca, leading teams that took 6 drugs through to approval and commercialization in over 100 countries. Currently founder and CEO at Cateran Consulting. Prior roles include CEO and founder of Crystalys Therapeutics and CEO of Ardea Biosciences. What was your approach to securing funding, and what advice would you give to other founders?
If you talk to 100 investors, you might get one that might invest out of the 100. So you just need to make that pitch as good as you possibly can.
If you could go back in time, what advice would you give to yourself at the start of your journey?
Having a very defined career path probably wasn't the best thing to do. Why on earth do you do this? To me, it's all about being able to get drugs to patients and help them, and it's the best feeling in the world to be able to do that.
James, welcome. Thanks for taking the time to speak with me.
My pleasure, Jeff.
So let's start with some foundational questions. So what inspired you to start your new company?
Well, the new company is called Crystalys Therapeutics. It's a very exciting opportunity. As always, the reason that I start any company or do anything in the pharmaceutical industry is ultimately, you want to be able to help patients. And the area that we're working in for Crystalys Therapeutics is something that's been a passion of mine for a long time, and looking forward to doing something that will really help patients.
Great. And then what problems does your startup aim to solve, and why is it important?
So the company is going to be focused on developing treatments for gout. It's a disease that is pretty misunderstood by a lot of people, but is very debilitating. There are over 15 million people in the US suffer from gout, and the level of treatment that those patients get and the level of medications that are available is really pretty poor. I was previously involved in developing a couple of gout medications at Ardea Biosciences, where I was CEO. And when my last company closed down, Crystalys Therapeutics, the investors there approached me and said, we're interested in investing in developing some new gout medicines. Would you be interested in working with us to do that? And that's how the company came about.
In terms of the competitive landscape, because I think there are some products that are sort of going to be in the approval process if they're not already approved. I think Sobi being one of those companies. I guess it's a case of you either want to be first to market or sort of like best in class. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. So thankfully for gout patients, there are a number of drugs in development, which is a very different situation from what it was 10 years ago, where really there'd been no new innovation in the gout treatment space for nearly 50 years. And I think there's a huge unmet medical need. So there's actually plenty space for multiple treatments to come to market. And I'm just excited about the opportunity for gout patients to receive different treatment options than they have today.
You possibly just answered my next question, but it was how did you identify your target market?
Yeah, so I guess I've known this market for a long time, and gout patients historically have been undertreated and underserved by the medical community, and misunderstood as well. I mean, most patients are told that it's a problem with their diet, and if they fix their diet, they'll sort it. That's actually not the case. The reason that patients develop gout is that their bodies doesn't have the ability to excrete enough uric acid, which is what the cause of gout is. So you really need treatments in order to do that. And there's a huge segment of the gout population that today really has no effective treatment options, and that's exactly where we're targeting.
So moving on to development and challenges, what were the biggest challenges you faced in the early stages of your startup? And it could be this one or it could be previous company.
Yeah, so we're in relatively early stages of this startup. So I'll probably refer back to previous biotechs that I've founded. I think there really are three main challenges. One is finding the molecule that you want to work on. And we end up doing a lot of diligence to identify the right molecule. And it's important that you have high standards when you do that, because ultimately you're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of money developing the molecule. Second thing is money. You need people to be prepared to invest in the company. It takes tens and hundreds of millions of dollars to move a drug from one stage of development to the next. And you need to have a solid development plan, business case that investors will be prepared to invest in and put their money at risk. And then the third area, which frankly is probably the most important, is the team. Selecting the right people to work with. And if you have the right team, you can achieve amazing things. So for me, that's the most important part.
You actually teed up my next question beautifully, so thank you for that. In terms of building your initial team, what qualities did you look for?
In our field, I look for people who are passionate about what they do, passionate about wanting to make a difference for patients, people who will do the right thing for patients. I mean, drug development is a difficult business, and you're persuading patients to take an investigational drug that could have benefits and could have risks as well. And you have to have a team that understands that and is going to make sure that they protect the patients while they develop the drug. And you have to have a group of people who have a common purpose, who are going to gel together, and frankly, who are going to have some fun working together as well. If you've got people who want to come into the office every day to work with the other people, particularly in a small company. I mean, right now our company's only 4 people, and those 4 people want to get up every morning and get on with developing the drug together and ultimately get it to patients.
So that leads me to my next question, which is like composition of boards. Of course, that's important. I guess, how do you approach that? There's 3 kinds of boards, as you know. There's value-destroying boards, fiduciaries who do their job and go home, and then boards who are true strategic assets. So how do you approach board composition?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, getting the right board is incredibly important. To a certain extent, to begin with, you, in a way, don't have a choice, because the people that decide to invest in your company will be on the board. So I think it's very important as you engage with investors to determine if that relationship is going to be a good relationship, because once they invest in the company, then they're going to be with you for a long period of time, and you're going to be working together on the board. I've been extremely lucky in the companies that I've been. The boards that I've worked with have been incredibly supportive. They've been challenging as well, but that's their job, right? They're making sure that we're making the right decisions for the development of the molecules, and we're making the right decisions for the money that they've invested in the company. One of the things I always think about and tell my teams as we're talking to investors is just think about who you want sitting around the board table when something goes wrong. So, the molecule either doesn't work or you have a safety issue, then, what are the characteristics of the people that you want around the table? And you want people who are going to be, first of all, that are experienced drug developers that have been there before, done it, seen failures, seen successes. And you want board members who will maintain level head and calmness, when things get tough. And I've been extremely lucky in having that in all the companies that I've worked in. And in particularly the last company, Crystalys Therapeutics, where we had a completely unexpected liver tox issue, and we had to stop the trial. We had a number of patients who were affected, by the liver tox issue. And obviously, you know, we needed to inform the board. And I have to say, I could not have asked for a better board of directors in terms of the calmness, the support, the guidance that they gave us as we worked our way through that. And it became a real partnership in doing ultimately what is right for patients, because I think at the end of the day, that's the primary thing that we need to do. I think the other thing that I would add to that is that, and I say this to, you know, other entrepreneurs that are starting up companies, the earlier you can get independent board members, you know, people who are either other CEOs or experienced drug development professionals, you know, who are not associated with your investors, and you can get them on your board. They're an independent voice, and I think provides a very nice balance to the composition of the board. And in fact, when we founded the previous company, Crystalys Therapeutics, my main investor, Tiba Anici from Novo Ventures, the first thing that she said to me was, James, you need to go and get an independent board director, somebody who's not me and not an investor in the company that you can talk to. So my recommendation is always get those independent directors onto the board as soon as you possibly can.
So I don't know if you're reading my questions upside down, but my next question was, can you describe a major pivot or change in direction in your startup that you had to make?
Yeah, so maybe I'll pick up on the Crystalys Therapeutics situation. The company was very successful. We'd raised $138 million in total. We'd taken the molecule that we licensed from AstraZeneca into phase 2B across 4 different indications, 2 dermatology, 2 rheumatology. We'd struck a collaboration and option to acquire deal with Arena Pharmaceuticals, another San Diego-based company that ultimately that became a Pfizer deal because Pfizer bought Arena. Pfizer were very engaged. They had their head of development was on our board. And, you know, the recruitment was progressing well into the trials. So everything was looking positive. You know, we were, you know, hopeful that the drug was working. And then suddenly, after 12 weeks of dosing, we started to see the liver enzymes elevated. Initially, just a single case. And, you know, we put it down at that point in time, as most people would do, that, you know, it was probably a viral hepatitis or something that had caused it. And drug-induced liver injury is a diagnosis of exclusion, so it takes a little bit of time to get to the conclusion. But ultimately, you know, we saw a couple of other patients experience the same thing, and at that point, you know, we decided that we needed to stop the program and get all the patients off drug. Again, do the right thing for patients is the main thing, even if it's a tough decision to make for the company. And, you know, that was a major inflection point for that company because we were a single asset company at that point, and we had to stop all 4 diseases that we were studying. You know, whereas I said at the beginning, we were well funded, so we still had $80 million in the bank at that point in time, but we didn't have a drug to work on, and we had a, you know, excellent team of 12 people. But we worked with the board and looked through various strategic options, and again, then did the right thing. The right thing was actually to close the company and return the monies to the investors. At the end of the day, although it was a disappointing thing to do, it was absolutely the right thing, and it was a major pivot. And as a result of that, you know, I have excellent relationships with those investors. The lead investor in Crystalys Therapeutics is the lead investor in the new company. And, you know, the people that we worked with in Crystalys Therapeutics, many of them are back working in the new company as well. So again, for me, Jeff, it's about, even if you've got to make really tough decisions, as long as you do the right thing, eventually it'll work out okay for everyone.
So moving on to risk, I wanted to ask how you manage risk and what is an acceptable level of risk. So, for example, one of the best ever presentations I ever saw was actually a former pilot and chief accident investigator, one of the major airlines. And I think there's a lot to that the pharmaceutical industry can actually learn from the airline industry in terms of like managing at risk. So, for example, you or I operate at a 1% level of risk of having an accident in their everyday lives. Of course, if the airlines operated at the same level of risk, they would have crashed all of their aircraft in less than a week. So the question becomes, what's an acceptable level of risk? And so for this particular airline, it was 10 to the power of minus 20, which equates to like crashing one aircraft every 100 years. And I think despite some of the recent publicized sort of aircraft accidents, they obviously have an amazing safety record. So again, just in the context of biotech and pharmaceutical industry, how do you manage risk? That's the role of a CEO. What is an acceptable level of risk?
Yeah, I guess there are many dimensions of risk in biotech. I mean, first of all, drug development is an inherently risky business in terms of your small probability of success. I have many colleagues. I spent 30 years at AstraZeneca, worked with many great colleagues who were excellent scientists, worked on many great programs, and never took a drug through to approval because it's so hard to do. And so I think, we're just, first of all, inherently risky business. But there are many dimensions to the risk. So I think there's risk associated with the molecule that you're developing. And I think the best way to manage that risk is to characterize that molecule as best you can and to keep characterizing it through the development. And if you see anything unusual, don't ignore it, right? Because it probably means something and is probably going to contribute to the level of risk. So really try and generate the data that is going to help you to decide whether the risk level is acceptable to carry on or not. And then I think secondly, from a development program perspective, again, use the science, use the data that's there to drive you to the decision about what the best disease is for you to study with this particular molecule. And I think by doing that, you at least somewhat minimize the risk. And then again, surround yourself by good people, right, that are prepared to be open and transparent about what the risks are. One of the things I always encourage my teams to do is, if you think something's wrong or something's going wrong, then tell everybody else that it's going wrong. And then, the chances are we may find a way to fix it or to mitigate the risk. So I think there are multiple dimensions there, and it's all about being open to the fact that things can go wrong, and also scenario planning as to what you're going to do when those things do go wrong. And is there a way to pivot and recover? Or, in the case we had with Crystalys Therapeutics is, we knew that was the end of the molecule, right? We could not give that molecule to patients again because it was going to cause harm, and we didn't know whether it was going to cause benefit for the patient. So I think having that transparency of what the issues are you're working with helps tremendously in managing the risk. And that risk, of course, modifies over time as well, and you just have to adapt to that.
So moving on to funding and growth, and as someone who's successfully raised lots of money, what was your approach to securing funding, and what advice would you give to other founders?
Interesting. If I think back to, I actually recently met again the very first investor that I ever pitched to, which was probably, I don't know, I guess maybe 10 years ago, she's looking at the new company as a potential investment. And the first conversation I had with her was, we were pretty bad when we pitched to you the first time, because actually you were the first investor we'd ever pitched to. So I think, people say practice makes perfect. It absolutely does. You need to develop your understanding of the molecule. You need to develop your plan of how you're going to develop that molecule, how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, what's the potential return. So put the business case together. And then you need to really practice about how you pitch that to the investors. Because remember, if you talk to 100 investors, you might get one that might invest out of the 100. So you just need to make that pitch as good as you possibly can. And for me as well, it's about being honest and transparent about the molecule. I've certainly come across many situations where we've been looking to acquire other molecules, and development teams, kind of really paint an overly rosy picture of the data that they have on the molecule. And that's never a good thing to do, right? Because at the end of the day, the data is what the data is. And people will discover it when they go into diligence and look more closely at it. So I'm always a great believer in just being totally transparent about what you know, what you don't know, and then, how you're planning to handle that. But raising money is tough. I always say this to young entrepreneurs that, ask for my advice. And I say to them, just get ready to be told no a lot. And you've got to be resilient and tenacious. You've got to also listen to the feedback that you're getting. And, if appropriate, pivot where you need to pivot if it makes sense.
Following on from like JPM this year, I think it's been a challenging time the last couple of years, but the two words cautious optimism have certainly being used. So I think, just looking at some of the deals that have been done, obviously, J&J sort of acquiring Intracellular Therapies, I think it was $14.6 billion. So I think money's available, but as you said, it's all about the data. And I think, certainly as a scientist originally, just like you say, being transparent, I think that's really important.
And I think in terms of the money, Jeff, that there's lots and lots of money available for investment. I mean, we've seen over the last few years, venture capital firms raising extremely large funds. And what that tells me is that the principles and the foundations of the business that we're in are still solid. I mean, people are getting older, they're suffering from more diseases. The science is getting better. It's opening up new targets, new approaches to basically treat those diseases. So I think the fundamentals are still there. It's just a matter of investors once again getting confident that they can invest early enough in research and development in order to allow those early stage companies to come forward. I think a lot of the investment that we're seeing, over the last 12 months or so has been fairly late stage clinical development, where a lot of the risk has already been bought down in those development plans. I think the area that's really tough is the preclinical discovery phase, where there's a lot of work still to be done, and there's multiple dimensions of risk still available. And I think investors are just still not ready for that at this point in time. But it will change. They'll come back, right?
I agree. So how do you measure success for your startup? What does success look like?
Oh, for me, success is. Maybe I'll tell you a story. The last company I was at, when we got approval, most of the people in the company had they'd worked in biotech for many years, but they'd never actually been in a company that had actually got approval for a drug. And I was very fortunate in my AstraZeneca career that I led 6 drugs through to approval over my career. So I knew what that felt like. And I used to say to the team, you're going to experience something you've never experienced before. And getting approval for a drug and seeing that drug help patients is one of the best feelings ever. And actually, after we got approval for 2 companies back, the Ardea company, once we got approval for our drug Zurampic, shortly after approval, I went into CVS to pick up a script for my wife, and the guy that was standing in front of me was collecting his first Zurampic script. And it was just an amazing feeling to think, I was responsible for developing that drug that is potentially going to transform another human being's, life and the way that they live it.
Yeah, I mean, I think given the attrition rate of drugs getting through the different stages, a relatively small number of people sort of like get to that stage. In my most recent role, we did the rolling BLA submission, and actually just being part of that was great, and we were uploading the documents to the FDA sort of like portal, and then you get your three sort of emails that the submission has been received, and that was just the clinical and the non-clinical packages. So, but even that was still, if you'd printed it out, it would have been 393,000 pages of documents. So I think it's as tall as a 15-story building.
It's an amazing achievement, right?
So it's brilliant. Moving on, what strategies have you found most effective for scaling your business?
I think in biotech, my main philosophy is to scale slowly and deliberately. What you don't want to do, and again, different people have different views about this, but my view is that start off with a small team, utilize people across disciplines where they're capable of operating. It just makes their jobs more interesting to start with. And only build your team when you really need it, right? You should be at the point where you're absolutely sure that you need to add team members. And I think with biotech as well, I mean, with both companies, the last one and this one that I recently started, there were only 4 of us at the beginning of the company, and we grew those companies to 12 or 15 people. This new one will probably be bigger than that. But the thing that's critical is that every single person that you add to the team is a critical component to the team, so they're a critical hire. And I always liken it to a jigsaw, right? You're placing the pieces in, and every piece that you place in then changes the rest of the shape that's left. And you have to be able to kind of meld those people together and have them all be part of the culture that you've created in the organization. And with a small team like that, if you have one person that doesn't fit into the organization, then you've got real problems, and you need to actually act quickly in order to solve that. So I think it's about getting the right people and getting the right mix together, and it requires a lot of thought in order to get that right.
Moving on to market and competition, and again, this could be the new but how do you differentiate your product or service from competitors?
It's all about looking at the unmet medical need and understanding what the patients and the physicians are really looking for. And what I mean by that is, you could have the FDA has a particular clinical endpoint that they accept as the regulatory approvable endpoint. That doesn't mean that's the most important thing for physicians and patients. And clearly, in order to get the drug approved, you need to hit the regulatory approvable endpoint. But it's about taking time to talk to those physicians, talk to the patients, really understand that patient journey, understand what's most important for the patient, and then make sure that you build those clinical endpoints into your development program. And then you'll end up with a drug that, clearly can be approved by the FDA because you met their regulatory approvable endpoint, but you've then got clinical data that actually shows that you're going to make these patients' lives better, and physicians will sit up and take notice of that. And I think then that positions you well for the launch of the drug and basically the adoption of the drug by physicians.
What trends do you see shaping the industry in the next few years?
Wow.
It's a wide question.
Yeah, it is. I think there's absolutely no doubt that artificial intelligence is going to play a big role. I think the thing that's most exciting and most scary is that we frankly have no idea what that looks like. I think there's been quite a bit of implementation of artificial intelligence in the discovery phase of development. Not convinced yet that we've seen too much proof that works. I think there's some evidence that it works. There's a lot of companies have got AI in their name now because it seems to be the place to go. I think one company that I actually run their therapeutic advisory board, a company called Invada Bio, they're developing drugs from plants And I've been extremely impressed about the way that they've used artificial intelligence and machine learning to really identify the drugs in the first place, identify the targets, then move them through discovery and get them to the clinic. I've seen them operate faster than I've seen any other company in my whole career. So I think that's probably a good example of where AI actually is working in the discovery phase. I think what's really intriguing is the clinical phase, and that's where I've spent all of my career. And how is AI going to change that? My guess is it's going to completely transform the way we do clinical trials and the way that we interact with patients. And you think about one of the biggest issues that you normally have with a clinical trial is when you get to the end of it, you've got to clean the data, you've got to do all the analysis, you've then got to write. You talked about the volume of documents that need to go to the FDA. AI is got to streamline that, right? It's got to, in a sense, it may do the data managers out of a job, right? Because the technology is so good that it can basically query and analyze and resolve the data issues without a human being potentially being involved in it. So I think things like that are really going to transform it. And the idea that how long does it take to do a new drug submission? 6 months maybe of working 18 hours a day with hundreds of people to do it. The possibility that in the future you could potentially do that at the press of a button once all the data's there, I think that's probably a possibility. And that certainly will, dramatically speed up the ability to get drugs to patients. And then I'm sure the FDA and the other regulatory authorities are going to start using artificial intelligence to review the data as well. And I think as long as that's done in a good way and it's controlled, then we're probably going to see significant, productivity improvements in our business.
There's a lot to unpack there in terms of the use of AI. I think the jury's still out because to my knowledge, there's no approved, there's no drug that's been approved using AI. So I guess the jury's still out because I think they're in phase 2 currently. But of course, what you're trying to do by using that sort of approach, because the traditional way of pick a winner in drug development is not the best. So of course, ultimately, you're trying to sort out the responders from the non-responders, so stratifying your patient cohorts, so giving yourself the best chance of success. So I think we will see that play out certainly in the clinical phases of drug development as well.
Yeah, and I think it's like I said when we were talking at the beginning about really understanding your molecule and understanding the data. I think the AI technology will give us the opportunity to review much larger amounts of data and consolidate that into a position than we do, frankly, manually today. And I think the ability to do that and the ability to access more information, as long as that information is good information, right? Because rubbish in, rubbish out is the old phrase. I'm sure that applies to AI as well. But assuming that the data is solid data, then I think ultimately it's going to put us in a position where we are better informed about the decisions that we're making in order to develop a drug, and can more rapidly get to an answer if there's a particular issue that we're trying to solve.
Let's move on to leadership and culture. So how do you foster a positive company culture as your team grows?
As the leader, you have to live and breathe it. Every single thing you do and every single thing you say, your team members watch you. And I've worked with many leaders in the past who will stand up there and describe the type of organization that they want to create. And then the first action or the first thing that comes out of their mouth the day afterwards is in total contradiction to what they said. And therefore, those leaders have no credibility in the staff's eyes, right? They're just words. So you have to be really authentic, and you have to basically do what you say you're going to do. It's not a difficult thing to define from my perspective. I think you need to create an environment where people feel safe, and people are prepared to put their hands up if they feel that something's wrong, and don't feel that there's any way that they're going to get punished, or people are going to get upset by them raising their hand and saying, look, I don't like what's going on here. So having that transparency is critical for me. And I always say that to every team I start working with, is that, if you think something's wrong, the sooner you voice your opinion, and then, let's talk about how we're going to investigate it, determine how we're going to deal with it. The sooner you know about something, the sooner you can potentially fix it or take some alternative action. So I think creating that transparency is important. And I think it's important to try and, teach people who are young in their career that it's okay for them to do that, right? So sometime, if I look back at the Ardea organization, there was like 170 people. We had, a lot of young members of staff who were early on in their career. And I remember at one point, somebody said that one of the team members had a concern, and I asked him to come and see me. And I was shocked, because he was shaking as he was coming in to sit down and talk to me. And I just didn't realize that, for him, this was a massive issue to go to the CEO and talk about something. But he explained what the issue was. I dealt with it appropriately. He was right. And what happened then is he went and talked to the rest of his colleagues about, well, I went and told James what the issue was. He listened to me, and then he went and solved it. And I think if you can just create some examples like that people, can see that you're going to behave in the way that you said you're going to behave, then they'll be open and transparent about what's happening in the organization. And then I think the other thing for me is that you just, honestly, as a leader, you need to care about the people you work with. And I don't mean just care about them as a whole. So that, people have a work life and people have a non-work life. Those two things are intermingled. And you just need to be prepared to help people to manage their way through the challenges they have at work or the challenges that they have at home. And, if, somebody's, kid's sick and they need to leave early to go pick them up from school, absolutely, go do it. There's no question. And I think if you really care for people and you give them the flexibility that they need in order to manage whatever's going on in their lives, then they'll give you that flexibility back. And I'm a great believer that if you treat people in that way, you actually never need to ask them to do anything, because they know what needs to be done, and they know that you gave them that flexibility. In return for it, they'll do whatever's necessary in order to make sure that the company's successful. And that's a very positive, reinforcing culture, and very different from the cultures that I'm sure all of us have experienced, where you go and tell somebody there's an issue, and the manager, thumps his hand on the desk or starts shouting at everybody. And once that's happened to you, it doesn't encourage you to do it again, right? Whereas I think if you, are prepared to listen to people, and I'm always a great believer of when somebody brings you an issue, you don't do the post-mortem at that point in time. You don't try to understand what went wrong. You actually just listen to it. You look to what the solution is, work with that person to find the solution, which of course is the best thing for the project and the company. And then once you've found the solution, when you come back and talk to the person, if they did something wrong, you don't need to tell them they did something wrong. They know already, right? And they've already thought about what it is that they're going to do in the future. So something bad then becomes a learning experience for them, and a positive learning experience. And then they become a better leader as a result of that. So it's about creating that sort of positive reinforcement in the culture for me.
On that point, what role does mentoring play in all of that?
I've had a number of mentors over my career, and they can take very different forms, right? They can be the person that you call up, once every 2 years for a specific bit of advice, or it can be somebody that you meet once a month for lunch and talk through. And a mentoring relationship has to work for both parties. I always say, when people ask me to mentor them, I always say, well, let's just get to know each other to begin with, right? Because I may not be the right fit to mentor you, and you may not be the right person for me to mentor. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's better, actually, if you identify early on that this is just not the right fit, then actually it's better to, at that point, say this is not something we should do, right? Because we're just going to waste each other's time and not get anything out of it. But if you find the right fit, then mentors are incredibly valuable. And when people, ask me to mentor them, I do take time to get to know them first. And they need to be prepared to be coachable, right? Some people aren't coachable, right? And and that's fine. That's them. And you can't try to change them. But if you find people who are coachable, and they like your style of, not I was going to say giving advice. It's not even giving advice. It's actually sharing experience, right? Of things that you've been through before. Because one of the important things from a mentoring perspective is you're not making the decisions for the person you're mentoring, right? You're bouncing ideas off them and gaining experience from situations that they've encountered in their past. And at the end of the day, it's for the mentee to still make the final decision about what is right or wrong. And that may or may not align with what the mentor said, right? So everybody has to make their own decision.
What role does customer feedback play in your product development?
I think in every industry, customer feedback's critical. The first time that I ever really got a good appreciation of customer feedback was pretty early on in my career. After I left academia, I went into the contract research organization world, which I know you're familiar with from your background, and spent a number of years there. And that really taught me about customer feedback, customer experience. And I think it's critical, right? If your customers aren't happy, your business is not going to be successful. So that applies across all businesses. But I think in drug development, it's somewhat different, because in a lot of cases, you don't see your customers, right? So, and they don't see you. You're a company name rather than individuals. And I think the time where you can actually really get that customer feedback is when you're designing your clinical program.
So patient
Patient advocacy groups, patient ad boards, where you sit down, you'd normally sit down with a bunch of experienced physicians and get their view. Do the same with the patients. Ask them what really matters. Explain to them the clinical trial that they're going to participate in. We had one great example I remember from AstraZeneca was we designed the clinical trial programs actually for lupus. It wasn't my project, but one of my colleagues was running it. And they actually simulated the whole clinical trial to a group of patients and actually put them through every procedure that they were going to go through in the clinical trial to get their feedback about, did this make sense? How burdensome was it? So I think getting that feedback soon and early is good, right?
I mean, yeah, that's the thing. You can have the perfect protocol, but operationalizing it, becomes really, really challenging. Moving on to personal reflection. So what has been your biggest learning experience as a founder?
Biggest learning experience as a founder. It's hard to do it. It's really hard to set up a business. And you have to be incredibly committed and really want to do it, because it's just hard work.
It's lonely as well.
And that's just about what I was going to say, is the CEO is probably the loneliest job that there is. And you don't realize that until things go wrong. you may have good people round about you that you can talk to, but ultimately you're the one that has to make the difficult decision and then implement it. And that is a lonely place. And that's where, just coming back to your previous point around mentoring, that's where having peer mentors is extremely helpful. So, I have a group of peer CEOs that, I interact with, and where you can have a very frank, very safe discussion with them. And sometimes, to be honest, offload a little bit on them, right? Because you need to let off steam sometimes, but you need to be able to do that in a safe place with somebody who also is in that same role and understands it. What I'd also say, about being a founder, it's also one of the greatest things ever, right? To actually create something from an idea and turn it into a real company that has real premises, people doing real work and enjoying it to do it is great, right? And then if you can take it all the way through to getting the drug to patients, that's even better, but that's even harder.
So my favorite question. So if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to yourself at the start of your journey?
Well, first of all, I don't think I would do anything differently. One of the bits of advice that when people ask me that type of question, one of the bits of advice that I give people is the very early on, two things, I think. Very early on in my career, I realized that having a very defined career path probably wasn't the best thing to do, because you then get fixated on that path, whatever that path may be. You get fixated on that path, and then you miss the opportunities to deviate off that path and go do something else that then may eventually bring you back on that path, or indeed take you in a different direction. And people sometimes ask me, you grew up in a small fishing village in the northeast of Scotland. How on earth did you plan your journey to be, a Biotech founder and CEO sitting in sunny Southern California in San Diego? And I always say to them, I didn't plan it at all, right? So my advice to people is, don't plan your career. Keep your eyes and ears open for opportunity. If you see an opportunity that you think can, where you can add value and it will allow you to grow, then just go and do it, right? And then it'll take you several steps in one direction, and then another opportunity will come along, and then that may take you in a slightly different direction, but in the end, it'll take you to a good place. And so, because of that, and I learned that early on in my career, I wouldn't change anything I did, because every single step that I took was part of that weird path that took me to sitting here with you today. I think the second thing, and again, I learned this early on in my career at AstraZeneca. I worked with our chief medical officer was a guy called Howard Hutchinson. And AstraZeneca had gone through a really tough period where we'd had a lot of development failures, hadn't launched a drug for many years. And then we launched this particular drug, and there was a big success. Everyone was very happy about it. And weeks after we launched it, we started to get reports of liver injury with the patients. And I always remember watching Howard, as the chief medical officer, make what must have been an incredibly difficult decision for him to actually withdraw the drug from the market. And the impact that had on the company and its finances, etc., was immense. But I always remember talking to him, and he said to me, James, it was the easiest decision ever. He said, I just did the right thing. And that's what I always say to people, just do the right thing, and eventually it'll work out in the right way for you.
Moving on to future outlook, what are your long-term goals for the company?
To take the drug that we've acquired and to have that being prescribed to patients. It's as simple as that, right? If we do that, I'll be extremely happy. And if, I think there's a high probability that we'll do that. But on the way, the main thing is to do good science and do the right experiments and then let the data talk for itself. If the data is good, then we'll get the drug to patients and it'll transform, millions of patients' lives, which is the best thing ever.
Yeah, it's all about the data. How do you see the startup landscape evolving in the next few years?
So from a life science perspective, I think we're going to continue to see more and more biotechs starting up. I think that's where the innovation comes from nowadays. It's where big pharma look for the innovation. I think big pharma have focused themselves now on the later stages of development, where actually they're much better than anybody else in doing that, and also getting drugs to patients once they're approved. Big pharma are superb in achieving that. I think you can get so much more innovation in the small companies, and I think we're going to just continue to see, that's where the engine of innovation is going to be. I think specifically in San Diego, I think we have a great innovation ecosystem here. I think the last time I read, we have, over 500 biotechs here in San Diego. And what I think is interesting about San Diego is we have an equal amount of tech companies as well. And then, of course, you have the crossover between biotech and tech. Sometimes it's difficult to define whether a company is a biotech, life science company, or whether it's a technology company. And I think as that technologies continue to develop, we'll see more and more innovation coming out of that. So I just see it going from strength to strength, and that's where the venture capital investors are looking to invest. And again, if you look at San Diego, we've gone from 1 million of venture capital 10 years ago to 6 or 7 million per year now. And I think we'll just continue to see that grow and grow. And ultimately that innovation will just drive both tech and life science innovations that will help people live their lives, help a better life, and help patients, live a healthier life.
As we wrap up, are there any questions that you would like me to ask that I didn't?
No, not really. The one maybe that you didn't ask me is, why on earth do you do this? People have asked me that in the past because it's hard, and my wife often asks me the question, why do you do this? And to me it's all about being able to get drugs to patients and help them, and it's the best feeling in the world to be able to do that. So yeah, that's probably all.
James, thank you.
Pleasure, Jeff. Thank you very much.
Innovating Tomorrow's Medicine with Dr. Jeff Trickett.